Hello, I'm Michael McShane, and on behalf of Killiney Historical Society, we're delighted to present this video recording of Eileen O'Duffy's talk entitled Wining, Dining and Dancing in Killiney and Dalkey Through the Ages. The talk was delivered on Tuesday the 2nd of April 2024 to a packed house in the Druids Chair pub in Killiney Village, a very appropriate venue given the topic. Eileen is a Dalkey resident, and her talk is based on her second book, which is called Champagne, Cocktails and Crêpes Suzette. Many of the venues which Eileen mentions in tonight's talk no longer exist, so this makes for a very enjoyable trip down memory lane for anyone who grew up in the Dalkey and Killiney areas during the 60s, 70s and 80s. For further information on Killiney Historical Society, please visit killineyhistory.ie, and remember to include a date in your diary for our historical weekend, which will take place on the 25th to 26th of May in the village. And the event is called Killiney on the Move, which is a celebration of all things transport related over 200 years in the Killiney and Ballybrack area. So please do join us for the weekend. We'll have a number of very interesting attractions along with an exhibition, slideshow, walks and talks for all the family. So without further ado, please sit back and enjoy Eileen's talk. Thank you.
My book, Champagne, Cocktails and Crêpes Suzette, it's the story of Dún Laoghaire. It's how Dún Laoghaire transformed from being a small, tiny little village up beside the Percy Loft into one of the most sophisticated, expensive resorts in Europe by 1820. The talk tonight is, if you like, a little offshoot from the book. It's all about our area, all about Killiney and Dalkey, and the wining, the dining and the dancing. Now sadly, most of the venues are now closed, so I'm hoping you're going to enjoy a trip down memory lane, a nostalgic trip to a golden era.
We can see you.
Oh, they can't see me. I'm going to be starting up with seaside hotels, and I'll try and explain why so many of the hotels were in Dalkey and Killiney, apart from the obvious, we're beside the sea. I'll then be moving to Crêpes Suzette, and a little word of warning, you might start getting very, very hungry at that stage when we're looking back over the fine cuisine of the past. And finally, I'll deal with the dancing, the dinner dances, the discos and the nightclubs in the area. Now, some of you have walked up here this evening, some of you have come up the rather steep Dalkey Avenue, and more of you have come from the other direction, up a really, really steep hill. Way back nearly 200 years ago, the stagecoach and the horses came all the way from Wexford, and this is where they stopped for their break. Just beside us there at the apartment block, the Victoria Arms Hotel. The horses got out to get some water, and all the passengers went for refreshments. So this Victoria Arms Hotel was literally there beside you, 1853, and it was the stop for refreshments. There were various names, Victoria House, Victoria Arms, but literally next door to us. And their beautiful photo, courtesy of killineyhistory.ie, of the Victoria Arms Hotel. Now, why were there so many hotels in Dalkey and Killiney? The main reason was transport. We had the stagecoach stopping to have the little break, but more than that, there were three other factors. In 1844, we had the Kingstown Atmospheric Railway, and engineers were literally coming from all over Europe to examine it and see how was it working, how was it going all the way down to Dún Laoghaire, shooting back up the metals and down again. So they actually built hotels for these people coming in the area. You also had the Dublin Kingstown Railway line, Obviously, when it was extended to Bray, there were more people. And then the Dalkey tram service in 1879. So this was one of the key reasons that Dalkey and Killiney had so many hotels, because we had the transport and then we had this novelty of the atmospheric railway. One of the early hotels was the Dalkey Hotel Tavern and Livery Stables in 1844, and the owner actually advertised that he wanted people to come and see this atmospheric railway, and he was therefore reducing prices so they could stay in his hotel. Now, that hotel was based roughly opposite old... There's somebody, I think, locked out there or trying to run away. That hotel was based just opposite Old Quarry and the Metals, and it was near, literally, the atmospheric railway. Now, the Queen's Hotel is one of the oldest hotels in Dalkey, and that photo is roughly 1865. But the Queen's Hotel is actually a lot older than that. It was there before any of this transport that I had talked about. Thomas Redding's 1765 map showed the Red Crow and the sign of the ship. And the Red Crow was the site for the Queen's Hotel. And it actually, the facade doesn't look very, very different now. And at the moment, coincidentally, the present Queens have applied for planning permission for another small hotel. And personally, I think it would be lovely to have a little hotel in Dalkey again. They've had objections, they've had problems, but it's still going through the planning process. So this Queen's Hotel had, as they say on their ad there, a spacious ballroom, parties free of expense, and I have no idea what a quadrille band is. All the most memorable terms. Now, this I think will be more familiar to a lot of you. The Queen's there when it was white during the 1970s, and then what I consider the heyday, the 1990s. I've dated that photo there in 1991 when they won the Black and White Pub of the Year. Now, any of you here remember the sun was always shining. I don't think it rained at all back then. Every single day, the front of the terrace, the back of the terrace, absolutely jammed and thriving. As I say, I never remember rain. I don't think it rained for 15 years. Now, another very early hotel, the Cliff Castle, that photo's roughly 1925. Okay, it was in the 1840s. It was built as a private residence, and in 1920 it was owned by Tim and Bridie Murphy. And I got a great little story from Roisin Meany. Her parents ran the hotel in the 70s, and Bridie and Tim were her grandparents. But she told me that in 1937 there was an auction going on in Wicklow in the Bel Air, and Bridie announced, "Oh, I'm heading down to get some bargain bed linen, blah." 2 hours later, she arrived back looking very, very sheepish. "I bought the Bel Air." And that was the first they ever heard of it. She bought the Bel Air. She went down to buy bed linen and bought the hotel. So that's why, if you're wondering, the letterheads all have both hotels. They've got the Bel Air Hotel, Ashford, County Wicklow, and the Cliff Castle. And Bridie ran both of them for years, right up to about 1970. So an awful lot of energy, I reckon. Now, there are not spelling errors or typos on this slide. The house was originally Colamore, C-O-L-A, Colamore Cottage, without the I-E, in 1830. Some of you might know the Cullen family, 1954. Michael Cullen is still living in the area, Marketing Ireland, and Jenny, his wife, and his dad, Matt, was very big in the area. So they originally owned what they called the Collymore Hotel. It then became the Collymore Hotel roughly around 1960, and then was bought by Jim Delaney in the 70s and became what I think most of us call it now, the Dalkey Island Hotel. Now, they're the kind of pictures that I remember. My favourite there is the top left, taken from the sea, from the lounge. The beautiful views of the bay, the car park. Anybody remember Joe Bollard on a Sunday evening at 7 playing the piano? It was fabulous. Collymore Hotel was hopping. It was hopping during the day, it was hopping in the evening, dinners, dancing. It was a hive of activity. Now, 2 more seaside hotels. And what's interesting, I said Dalkey and Killiney have more hotels, you know, than any of the other surrounding areas in Dún Laoghaire. Khyber Pass Hotel opened originally in 1946, and it was also known at various stages as the Killiney Heights Hotel. 1972, purchased by Charlie Lawler, and unfortunately closed 7 years later. It replaced with an apartment block, and that's something you're going to see for nearly every hotel I mentioned. The Dalkey Island was replaced with another big apartment block. The Shangri-La, demolished in 1979, more apartment blocks. So these venues that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, that we all have such happy memories, most of them are gone. The big apartment blocks. The Victoria Arms over there, it's another apartment block. Now, moving nearer home again, the Killiney Court Hotel. Originally built in 1865, Court na Farraga House. In the 1950s, David and Rosie O'Flaherty, they called it the Court Hotel. And that new wing and tower, they were added in the 1970s. So that's really the picture of what we remember as the beautiful Killiney Court Hotel. Now there's the old Court na Farraga, roughly dated around 1920. That's the hotel as we know it. And there on the bottom right are the court apartments, and you see preserved the original building. And ironically, when I went up to get photos for my book, I wasn't allowed into this gated community. I wasn't allowed to go up with my camera to take photos, so I eventually nicked them from elsewhere. But not alone is it gone, it's gone as a place to walk around for locals. Now moving even nearer, the Killiney Castle. I'm well aware it's Fitzpatrick's Castle now, but I've deliberately used Killiney Castle because it was Killiney Castle in various forms from 1949. Originally 1740, Mount Mapus, built by Colonel John Mapus. 1948 to 1955, Patrick Keenan. It was the Killiney Castle B&B, Killiney Castle Hotel. And then in 1971, Paddy and Etna Fitzpatrick bought it, and it became Fitzpatrick Castle Hotel. Now, there are various shots there. That's roughly the 1950s on the top left. The top right there are the Fitzpatrick family. I had put 1970s, but my sister, who knows her fashions and clothing, informed me that this was in fact the 1980s, possibly. Yeah, yes. Yes. So whatever clothing is being modelled there, misstated. Down on the bottom was very near the opening of the hotel in 1971 with Paddy and Etna Fitzpatrick. Now, you see on the top left, that's an old brochure for Killiney Castle, and as far as I know, that brochure was used for America, and it's still up in the hotel lobby. Now, I'm not sure what sort of eyesight, people have better eyesight than me, but if you look in the very centre of the top left brochure, you see a scruffy looking girl with tously black hair wearing a uniform, and that's me. Now, there you go. There she is, a little bit bigger. That's me back in 1978, and it's actually in the grill bar. I worked in the restaurant, but that photo was taken in the grill bar. I wasn't supposed to be modelling, but the model didn't turn up that day for the photo shoot, and I had a choice of waiting tables for 6 hours or going and prancing around the dungeon and getting my photo taken. So I opted to prance around the dungeon. Now, the reason I'm talking about this, I worked in the castle for about 2 years, waiting tables in the dining room. My family wouldn't have had the money to go there eating, but that's where I was introduced to fine dining of the highest quality, dining I had never seen before. They had what they call silver service waitering, where out came the chef and all the commie chefs, and I was a commie waiter, sorry. Out came the commie waiter, and we'd bring the food to the table, and they'd cook and carve the rack of lamb, but it was the crêpes Suzettes that I remembered. I'd watched the waiters flambeing away, and I just thought this was magic. And for me, it represented a marker of haute cuisine, and that's why I used crêpes Suzette in the title of my book. So with no further ado, crêpes Suzette, fine dining in Killiney and in Dalkey. For anyone who's interested in cuisine and the history of cuisine, I really recommend finding this. It's online. It's about 400 pages of a thesis written by Martin McConivra. He's a chef and he's a culinary historian. He literally has written everything you've ever heard about dining in Ireland and all the various phases of dining and who was who and what was what. So he described Dublin as the golden age of haute cuisine in the 70s, as a place that people all over Europe were talking about for our fine dining. Mainly French cuisine, classical French dishes. They were the main dishes. Killiney Castle, Killiney Court, and other restaurants I'll be talking about. Sole manure, lobster Newburg, steak tartare, steak au poivre, and crêpes Suzette. I did check before I put the book out. Crêpes Suzette was literally on nearly every dessert menu. That's the silver service I was talking about, this team of waiters and commie waiters coming to the table. Now, I haven't seen silver service for a long time. Now we have what is called plated. Out comes the plate. Maybe the vegetables are served, but they're no longer cooking at the tables. Now, Fitzpatrick Castle was where I saw the fine dining myself for the first time. Many of you remember there, that's the banqueting staff, all the uniform, the little waistcoat, the long skirt, the little white shirts. That's obviously a wedding, and they waited for the guests to arrive. Down there, Anybody remember Charlie Gallen? He was the banqueting manager for about 15 years, and that's his team of ladies. That's the ballroom all set up. So everything was very formal and very, very well presented, as much to be looked at as to actually eat. Another thing I remembered from the castle, the menu was handwritten every day. It was a different menu every day. And it was handwritten by Sean Dempsey, the head chef, and Mike Finan, the head waiter. And the sheer variety of the everyday menu, and there was even a little footnote under the menu. The chef is prepared to prepare a meal that you want. Like, you could ask for what you wanted. And it just strikes me now, the menus have all become very homogenous, where you have a choice of fish and chips, burger and chips, and if you're splashing out, steak and chips. Whereas back in this era, there was a wide variety. And yep, the crepes Suzettes are there on the dessert menu. Now, the Killiney court also was renowned for its absolutely fabulous food. Weddings, if they weren't in Killiney Castle, they were in Killiney Court. And we all remember the sumptuous food. I know my family, we used to go regularly to the library, and that was the budget option. And the beautiful seafood platter, the chicken Maryland, everything was absolutely succulent. Now, you'll notice on the bottom left a buffet and a very famous chef, Arthur McGee. And let's have a closer look at the beautiful buffet. When was the last time you saw a beautiful buffet like that? And this is before Instagram. This is before people were taking photos. I got this from an official brochure. This was the norm. Beautiful display and beautiful, delicious food. And as I said before, any cameras, that's from an official brochure for the Court Hotel. Now, even closer to home, right next door, here in Killiney, we had Restaurant Roland. Just again where that apartment block is, formerly the Victoria Arms Hotel. The owners, Henri and Elena, and as Michael had mentioned, Elena is here today with us and with her son Philippe. Henri Roland, he was the son of the famous French gourmet chef Pierre Roland. Pierre Roland was described by Irish hoteliers as one of the top 10 chefs in Europe. He worked in the Russell Hotel, the only hotel in Ireland to get a Michelin star. And Henri trained under his father. Here's a beautiful sketch that Philippe sent me of Restaurant Roland. It's from 1971. And there we are on the far right. We're here in this room, and there's Restaurant Roland just next door to us. Beautiful times gone by. Now, Henri was a renowned chef in his own right. He regularly, his menus were featured in the national papers, and that's just one example there. I won't pronounce it properly, brochette de clam à l'Ondion, but that's a menu from Henri Roland, and they were printed regularly in the national newspapers. And here, Restaurant Roland was the only restaurant in County Dublin to qualify for an Egon Rooney star in 1974. Only one restaurant in County Dublin, and that was Restaurant Roland. And the article there is obviously too small to read, but I've just taken out two quotes that I really liked. Although we are open only a short time, we have worked really hard to provide a really top French cuisine. And that's Elena Roland, Henri's wife. Her husband Henri is a chef patron, and that was something else that was very unusual in 1974, that you had a restaurant owned and managed by the chef. The only other two at the similar time were Sean Kinsella with the Mirabeau and later Mervyn Stewart with the Guinea Pig. But it was very unusual in the 70s to have a restaurant owned and a chef proprietor. So Henri does all the buying and the cooking, so he knows exactly how to maintain standards. People who eat here can be sure they won't be let down, and I'm sure they weren't. A quick roll of honour: 74, 75, the Egon Roney Star; 78, 79 and 1980, Michelin. Now, I loved this quote from the Business and Finance about Michelin. They were griping that Michelin was nearly impossible to get. Ireland has no luxury restaurant, nor do we have a top-class restaurant. We have only one very comfortable restaurant, Restaurant Roland in Killiney. So this apparently was very high praise. We had one comfortable restaurant in Ireland, and that was our very own Restaurant Roland. Now, when Restaurant Roland closed, it became Kites, and many of you may remember Kites, a beautiful Chinese restaurant owned by Susie and Catherine and Spencer Wong. It was demolished a few years later for apartment block Killiney Hill Plaza development. Now, as I said, the chef proprietors were rare. Another one was Mervyn Stewart of the Guinea Pig. And the good news is that's one of the only venues I'm mentioning that is still open and functioning as a high-class French restaurant. Mervyn, 1978, again the classical French dishes: escargot, tortue claire, entrecôte béarnaise, all top French cuisine. It was sold in 2017 to Jerome Fernandez, very fittingly a French chef. And you can still dine in the Guinea Pig, and they are still serving top French cuisine. Now, the menu there, obviously way too long to go through, but again, all French cuisine, and we've crêpe Suzette on the menu, on the desserts. Now, some of you may remember the Dalkey Food Circle. The Guinea Pig were involved, but they were joined with another group of restaurants, and basically they organised safari nights, and the idea was that people could have their starter in one top restaurant, have their main course in another, have their dessert somewhere else. They went on, I'd say, for about 2 years or so. I was never on one, but they were absolutely legendary in Dalkey, where people got the chance to sample a variety of restaurants, the Good Food Circle. Now, the chairperson was Liam Silk. He was then married to Niamh Silk, Niamh's restaurants. Now, they're the restaurants that were involved in the Dalkey Good Food Circle. Niamh's, and I met Niamh, I think about a year ago. I had never met her before, and she wanted some copies of the book for her children. And we spoke for an hour, and she got very emotional about the happy memories of glamour in Dalkey, herself and Liam running this amazing restaurant. And as I said, it was a very emotional talk, and I was upset she died 3 weeks later. But I just felt I got to meet her, I got to tell her we remember and how fabulous Niamh's restaurant was. And people are still talking about Niamh's cheesecake, and people are pretending they have the recipe, but I've yet to see it. Other restaurants were Leopold's, Sheila Hiff, Baroque, Restaurant Baroque and Leopold's, and that's Neves there, number 26, Castle Street, Dalkey. Now we're moving to dancing. The dancing changed around a lot. Back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, it was very much formal, dinner dance, and the Cliff Castle even had afternoon dinner dances. That beautiful photo is from the 1940s Cliff Castle Ballroom, and Roisin Meany gave it to me, and her beautiful mum, Isha Meany, is there in the centre, who actually died very young. I think Roisin was only about 10 at the time. But that is the old world Cliff Castle Ballroom in the 1940s. Now, a little bit more downmarket dinner dance was in the, sorry, I don't mean to be rude, on the Shangri-La, but they are talking about chicken and chip supper. And that ad there is from the Community Council newsletter in 1977. And they had a brief stop halfway through the dance for the chicken and chips. Now, it wasn't that people wanted chicken and chips, but you couldn't get a bar license extended unless you served food. So hence, stop all the action, eat your chicken and chips, and keep dancing again. Now, Cliff Castle had loads of things. I mean, they had the more formal dinner dances, and then they had Johnny McAvoy. He was recorded on RTE down in the Cliff Castle. They had show bands, all sorts of various forms of entertainment and dancing and discos. Now, some of the madder ones were the Voodoo Lounge. They had this group from Tonga, and they had this Voodoo Lounge, and it was all Polynesian with all these mad Tongan shirts. That went on for a year or two. And then you'd Shay Healy and various other artists performing. Now, that's an ad for the Cliff Castle from one of the Dalkey festivals. And I actually had to read it a few times and see, was I imagining things? The restaurant was open until 5 a.m. And weekends from 24/7, the restaurant did not shut. And breakfast was served from 3 to 6. What happened, lads? What happened? We're having arguments at the moment on whether we can open the pub another hour. This is what we grew up with. This 24/7. Now, the reason the restaurant was open 24/7 is that the bar was open 24/7. I'm sure that restaurant was empty, but they were serving breakfast at 3 a.m. And that's the sort of life we had back in the 80s, and we're still fighting fit. Now, the court disco, we've talked about this food. The court disco was Sunday night. The bar shut at 10 on a Sunday so that everybody could get to work on Monday morning. So the court disco came up with this ingenious idea that the bar shut at 10, and at 11:30 they served curry or vol-au-vent, lots of food, and at midnight, Monday, wasn't Sunday anymore, up went the shutters, and about 100 pints of Guinness were ready and tossed out. And I know, working in Killiney Castle, we went every Sunday up to the court, up for the curry or up for the vol-au-vent, and in fairness, they were lovely. I loved them. And out came the pints at 12 o'clock, and we were there till 4 in the morning. So that's how the court disco had their little Irish solution to an Irish problem. Now, finally, Jesters. I wish Jesters was in Fitzpatrick's across the road. I wish I could end tonight and say, oh look, come on, let's all head over and we'll be there for an hour or two. No, Jesters is gone as well.